Matthew 10:40-42. Those who welcome you also welcome me, and those who welcome me welcome the one who sent me. Those who welcome prophets just because they are prophets will receive the reward reserved for the prophets themselves. Those who welcome holy people just because they are holy will receive the reward of the holy ones. The truth is, whoever gives
a cup of cold water to one of these lowly ones just for being a disciple will not lack a reward. La palabra de Dios.
Many of you do know that I returned this week from a family trip to Ireland. What's that? Oh, thank you. It was cloudy and rainy. It was also beautiful. I don't have a tan. But together with my parents, my brother, my cousin, my partner, our child, I had this amazing opportunity to return to an ancestral homeland. We walked the land that my mother's great-great-grandfather, Lawrence Kelly, may have farmed and ultimately left after the potato famine. We visited the grave sites of some of his ancestors and relatives in the Wicklow Mountains in County Wicklow, as well as cemeteries of ancestors we don't know in County Clare on the Killeen side of my family. And most movingly, we met actual relatives, flesh and blood people who are descendants of those same ancestors, but the ones who stayed in Ireland. It's so basic and obvious that these people might exist, but it actually felt like some kind of magic to look into their eyes and hold the hands of people who share some cultural and physical connection to me and to my child. The day that we met the Kellys, the Kelly family, we had driven about 4 hours by car from County Clare east to County Wicklow, and the drive had been a bit of a slog with the effects of jet lag still hounding us and a very cranky preschooler in the back seat. But when we arrived to their home, we were each welcomed into the yard with a warm embrace, a view of the countryside, and a glass of cold water. A cup of cold water. I really wanted to resist preaching about my trip to Ireland. It was such a privilege to go, and sometimes I even feel a little embarrassed to talk about it. But in the end, I thought maybe the best way to honor this trip is to try to make meaning of it and to share it. And our scripture passage today couldn't let me set it aside. Whoever gives even a cup of cold water to these lowly ones. That cup of cold water, it wouldn't let me go. We sat down, we took our water and we sat down under an awning, and Hanel was still so tired. And so he was kind of clinging to me. And then out walked one of our relatives with her 2 grandchildren. And they kind of looked at each other. And within 5 or 10 minutes, Hanel was off in the yard, like running in circles and picking blueberries. And it caught my heart off guard. And it just blew it wide open. This little passage in Matthew, though, there are some similarities, but also many differences between the welcome that our relatives offered to us in Ireland and the welcome that Jesus speaks of here in Matthew. This text comes at the closing of the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus is essentially installing and sending his disciples out to preach and to teach. And he's warning them of the dangers that they will face in this work and advising them on how to travel. That is, to bring nothing with them and to ask for hospitality in the towns where they go. And so these words of welcome are in reference to that. Because the disciples faced real danger in the places that they were not welcomed. Without welcome, they faced hunger, lack of shelter, even prison or execution. And offering welcome or hospitality to a disciple could have meant taking on some of those same risks. It was to make a kind of broader connection to the teachings of the way of Jesus. It was a physical and tactile commitment to the broader community of the followers of Jesus. Now, my family, of course, wasn't traveling to Ireland in any kind of way that the intention of the trip was to preach and teach the gospel. And we weren't facing danger or destitution if we weren't taken in by our relatives or by actually almost, strangers. We did not know these people. But I still want to tell you of another story of another welcome that they gave to us. On our second night in County Wicklow, all 9 living siblings of this Kelly family and many of their descendants gathered to welcome us at a reception in town. And at this reception, one of the siblings, Patricia Kelly, in offering the first toast, drew all of our attention to Hanel, who is my son, and who, by the way, was also up way past his bedtime and just had his face in his tablet. But she drew her attention to him, all of our attention to him. And she said, "This is why we're here, for our future, for the relationships of our children to each other, for them to know themselves, to have a connection to their lineage, their traditions, their land, their story, their indigeneity, the place to which they are indigenous." Places. Any of you who have seen and met Hanel, whose name is the Korean word for sky, know that Hanel is not white. The Irish blood that flows through his veins is a small portion of his lineages. And the Kelly family represented only half of that. But by naming this biracial, bicultural child as a symbol of why we were gathering, it was the welcome of a cup of cold water, 7 times 7 times 7 times over. In that moment, my heart blew right open all over again. Welcome can catch our hearts off guard and blow them open. Now, after Patricia spoke, it was my mother's turn to speak. And she told the story of Hanel's great-great-great-great-grandfather, Lawrence Kelly, again, who left Ireland for Wisconsin in the wake of the potato famine to find life somewhere else. Now, something that I learned along the way when we were in Ireland, which I knew, but I didn't know, was the way in which British colonialism in the world also took place in Ireland, and in a way that is still very much alive for the people of that country today, as they're working to rebuild their culture, their native language, even their very population in the wake of the famine. Now, of course, this is something, right, that I intellectually knew, but in my body of this white American woman who mostly observes and experiences the effects of oppression in our culture along racial lines, I didn't really feel or understand or expect the way that this oppression also impacted the Irish, but it is there. And Brian and I were similarly struck at the similarity that we felt of the story of Ireland and its occupation by Great Britain to the story of Korea and its occupation by Japan in the first half of the 20th century, of which Fumi spoke so potently and powerfully on Pentecost. The theft of land, of language, of culture, the indoctrination of children, the control, the violence, it's all there as well. Ireland, South Korea, America. Ireland gains its independence from Great Britain in 1922, I think. I meant to look that up to double check. But it was about that time. South Korea only gained independence from Japan a little more than 2 decades later, only to be divided up between Russia and the Allies after the Second World War as territory, shortly then to fall into an intense civil war afterward. I've often thought about this Korean history as much more recent. I didn't realize how alive Ireland's struggle still is today as well. So Lawrence Kelly's son, William Kelly, Connell's great-great-great-grandfather, left Wisconsin for South Dakota by way of the Homestead Act, purchasing a tiny square of the prairie from the government. He was the first of that family to own land that had been stolen by way of genocide and forced migration of the Dakota people. William Kelly's sod hut and tidy rows of crops displaced wild prairie and Dakota teepees. And though his father left Ireland to escape British colonial rule, and though he struggled, and though the farm barely survived, and though he actually, family lore is that he said he wished he could go back to Wisconsin, but now it was too late. He still participated in another kind of colonialism, settler colonialism. This tension of overlapping and intersecting oppressions lives in my body, in all of our bodies, and it lives in the body of my son. What is the responsibility that I hold as a descendant of these settlers to the native people on this land, to the Multnomah, the Cowlitz, the Clackamas, those names that we identify every single service here at Salt and Light? What is the responsibility that I personally have to the Dakota people of the prairies, to the Ojibwe, whom my family literally displaced? What is the responsibility that all of us have as participants in an institution, Christianity, that not only condoned, but perpetuated the colonization of the land and the native people living on it? This coming Tuesday is our country's Independence Day. Also from British colonial rule, although it came much earlier than Ireland's independence and many other colonies of Great Britain. We gained our freedom from Great Britain, the story goes, from unfair taxation, from royal rule. But on this Independence Day, I want us to think about what is our freedom for? And at what cost? And at whose cost did this freedom come? The Supreme Court this week struck down a long-standing precedent by declaring affirmative action to be unconstitutional. We may have thrown off British colonial rule in 1776, but this country has yet to liberate ourselves from settler colonial culture. What is our freedom for when the descendants of enslaved people and the descendants of people who are indigenous to this place cannot gain equal access to the education that, broadly speaking, is needed to thrive in America? If they cannot get even a commitment to try to provide that equal access? What is our freedom for when it comes at the cost of oppressing others? Liberation is not liberation if it is not for all of us. The way of Jesus is liberation for all of us. This is the message that can catch your heart off guard and blow it right open. It is the message of the disciples that they were preaching at the risk of their own lives. And it was the message embraced by those who welcomed those disciples into their home. Even a cup of cold water. When the followers of Jesus welcomed disciples into their homes, they were welcoming much more than one person. And when we welcome each other, we welcome much more than the one person standing before us. To welcome my child, Hanel, is to welcome the complexity that exists in his body of all of his ancestors' struggle for life. It is to welcome the strange and wrenching and even miraculous course of history that led to his life even being possible. And it is to even notice how quickly all of our struggle for life can tip into hoarding life, hoarding resources, hoarding power. But the way of Jesus promises that there is enough life for all of us, that there is enough, and it blows our heart right open. So to welcome each other is to catch our hearts off guard and to blow our hearts open. And there's so much to welcome. We can welcome discomfort. It will provoke our thoughts and improve our actions. We can welcome change. It is the only constant and the only way to release ourselves from our need for control and to find our way towards shared liberation. We can welcome love, that ground spring energy, spirit, that soft, calm presence of earth and the tall wisdom of trees. Love fortifies us and reminds us of what is true. Love moves us toward each other. So this week, as we mark yet another anniversary of this complicated country's independence, what will you welcome? So one of the values that we hold as community is that we honor the wisdom of this gathered community here. And we do this by taking time, about 5 to 10 minutes, to turn to one another in one-to-one conversations and share our reactions to what's been shared. And then we open it up to the broader group and share out further to harvest the wisdom of everyone here. So this is not an obligation. There's no requirement to participate. It's a beautiful day. We have a beautiful garden. We have tea to drink and water in the back. But if you feel open to it, I invite you to turn to one another and discuss what is it that you are welcoming this day.